start recording and turn it over to Dr. Bolton. Thank you, Dr. Bolton, for being with us.
Lauren, thank you so much. I love the work that we've done together. I'm a big fan of the work that you guys do in District 95 and the teams that I've worked with, the engagement, the care um, that your team has for students is unmatched. So I'm grateful for the long-term partnership, and I'm really grateful to be presenting to the parent community and about something that I think I've learned more about emotional regulation than just about anything else in my career. And I'm eager to share some of what I've learned with all of you. I want to start with a public health parable. And in this parable, there are two people sitting by a river, and they're enjoying a beautiful day. And they look up and they see a child in the water who's drowning. And so, of course, they dive in the water, and they pull this child to safety, and they're exhausted. And they look up and they see two more kids in the water, and they dive back in and they get those kids to safety. And when they look back at the river is filled with kids who need their help. And so one of them dives back in to try and rescue as many kids as he can. And the other one goes up on shore. And the one in the water yells, "What are you doing up there? I can't save these kids on my own." And the one on shore says, "I'm going upstream. I want to figure out why these kids keep falling in, and we got to stop it there." And so the thing is, we think about kids' hardest moments. Those hardest moments, it's always a downstream problem. Upstream problems are stresses they're experiencing. Some like kids who've experienced trauma or having skill deficits, and we're asking them to do things they just can't do, or they're slower to develop, and we get frustrated with them because they're slower to develop. All of these things can be upstream problems. See, when we focus on behavior, we're solving the wrong problem. But it's compelling for us to do that because when we look downstream, when we see a behavior, we think, okay, there's a behavior. There's gonna be an incentive or a punishment that'll solve that, right? But the problem is when we look at the behavior, we're not figuring out what's happening upstream. So it doesn't last because it doesn't address the real problem. Upstream solutions are slower and hazier, but when they work, they can accomplish massive and long-lasting good. See, the thing is that we've been ignoring research for over 150 years. We've been focusing downstream. And what I want to do today is I want to focus on a new way of understanding behavior. See, the old way of understanding behavior is thinking about behavior only through the lens of motivation. And this is how a lot of our parenting wisdom comes from. A lot of our educational interventions happen. This has been embedded in our lives for over a century at this point. What it says is that when kids behave in a certain way, it's because they're motivated to do that. And so in order to get them to not behave in that way, or in order to get them to behave in positive ways, we're going to use carrots and sticks to get them there. But I want to think about things upstream. And when we think about what's upstream, upstream is emotional regulation. It's figuring out how can we help kids be emotionally regulated, because it's emotional dysregulation that leads to the problems that that create our hardest moments with them. And unfortunately for ourselves too. So I want you to think about the last time you lost your temper or just melted down. What did you look like? What did you sound like? What dumb thing did you say or do? Including it might be something you yelled at somebody, someone you love, some hurtful thing that you did, or it could be shutting down and avoiding something that you know you needed to do. It looks different for each of us, but either way, there are these moments where we just make these terrible decisions, not dissimilar to what our kids look like when they are having their hardest moments. So the question is, we're good people, we're bright people. Why is it that we do such stupid and often hurtful things to other people? So I want to go back. I said it was 150 years. It's about, maybe closer to 175 years that we've known about what causes these behavior problems. And it was Phineas Gage that really helped us understand what it was that is at the root of behavior problems. Um, he wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a doctor. He actually worked on the railroads. He was working on the railroads outside of Cavendish, Vermont. Now, as you can imagine, Vermont is a place with all sorts of mountains, right? And so they needed to try and get these railroad tracks as flat as they can. So Gage's job, he was a foreman on the railroad crew. His job was to drill a hole in the ground, generally, oftentimes in rocks, and then put explosive in there, tamp it down with other rocks and soil and things, step back, light it, blow up a hole in the side of the mountain so they can lay their tracks. Well, Gage had a very bad day one day. And as he was tamping it down, he must have caused a spark that ignited the explosive at the bottom. And that his tamping rod shot out of the hole and he was leaning over it and it caught him right underneath his cheek and went out the top of his head, landing about 80 feet away. That's how powerful it was. Now, Gage wasn't killed. He was stunned and bloody, and there were brains all over the place, but they got him to stand up. He got to a carriage. He could talk, he could walk. He had to wait for the doctor to show up. When the doctor showed up, not only did he have language, he had a sense of humor. He said, "Doctor, here's business enough for you." So here's what this tamping rod did was it went right through the prefrontal cortex part of his brain. Now, Gage made almost a complete physical recovery. He couldn't use his left eye, but otherwise he made almost a complete physical recovery. The thing was that he was a different person. His friends described Gage as fitful and irreverent, indulging at times in the grossest profanity, capricious and vacillating, and being radically changed so decidedly that his friends and acquaintances said he was no longer Gage. You know, when I think of myself when I'm melting down, I have to admit that there are times I indulge in the grossest profanity, that I could be described as capricious and vacillating. And here's the thing, people would say, if you saw me in my worst moments, you'd say, "Oh my gosh, that can't be the guy teaching us about emotional regulation. That can't be Doug, right?" And so this is what happens for all of us. See, this part of our brain controls some very, very important, gives us is in charge of some very, very important tools. Our ability to control our impulses and inhibit things, emotional regulation more generally, our ability to initiate tasks, to persist when things get hard, to transition, especially from a preferred to a non-preferred activity, to have empathy for others, to maintain attention, especially after a long day, to be able to plan, all of these things. I like what Robert Sapolsky said. It makes you do the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. It helps you get up off the couch when you want to binge that one more episode, but you've got to do the laundry or make dinner or go grocery shopping, right? It makes you bite your tongue when you want to say the thing that you shouldn't say. It makes you write the outline instead of just try and getting through with the paper. See, what this speaks to is the fact that behavior problems are about brain development, not motivation. So it's a myth that we are primarily rational beings. Now, we are rational beings. We've got a great rational brain. But we are really survival beings. Our brains are built for survival. So here's a little brain science for you at late at night. So the brain has essentially, and this is more of a metaphor because the brain is much more complex than this, but I like simple theories because I understand them better. But the brain, the cortex is that green part of the brain, and that's really when we think about being rational people. That the cortex is really in control of that. It manages language. It manages our ability to focus and concentrate and solve difficult problems and all sorts of stuff, right? The limbic system is in charge, is that yellow part of our brain. And really what the limbic system is it's the part of our brain, it's an alarm system. It says either we're safe and so we can approach whatever it is that's there, or we're in danger and we have to run from it. And what it does is it communicates with our brainstem, which reacts to however we perceive the world. If we perceive it as safe, then our brainstem goes into homeostasis. We can think clearly and broadly and do all that wonderful rational stuff. But if our brain says we are in danger, it triggers that brainstem to trigger our stress response. And our stress response pushes us into the lower parts of our brain, and we don't have access to the cortex in the same way. This is what we talk about when we talk about fight, flight, and freeze. And in these moments, what happens is we lose some really important tools when we go into the lower parts of our brain. We're not as good at listening, or we're not as creative. We lose flexibility. We lose empathy. We can love our kids and our spouses like crazy, but in these moments, we say things that suggest we don't have any empathy for them because we can't access that part of our brain. There may be times when we're really flexible generally, but in these moments, we can appear really inflexible. It's harder for us to, we don't embed, we can't embed memories into our cortex. And so we lose sequences of things. Oftentimes, when we are really upset, it's harder for us to remember things. That's why eyewitness testimony is so unreliable, because we're not able to encode that. So when kids say, when we ask them what happened and they have a different story than what we remember, we think they're avoiding or lying, but in fact, they may very well remember it differently. Language. Have you ever noticed how language changes when we're in our worst moments, right? For me, the only words I can think of are 4 letters long, and I feel like I've got to yell them, right? But other times I don't feel like I can't find the words. It's like I just can't even speak. And then there's inhibition, this idea that we've got to be able to inhibit our impulses, and yet in these moments, it's hard for us. We may know that we shouldn't say that. We may know we shouldn't do that, but boom, there we go and do it because we can't inhibit in the same way. But here's the thing. What do we do when kids are stressed? We say, listen to me. We say, come up with another solution. That's not going to work. We say, you need to be flexible. The world doesn't rotate around you. We say, take perspective. You need to have empathy for other people. You don't know it. Think about how this is impacting your sister. We ask them what happened. They've got a different memory of it. We ask them to tell us what happened. They yell at us, or they shut down and don't tell us anything. We say, stop doing that, and they can't stop doing that. Not because they don't want to, not because they're not motivated to do those things. They just can't access that part of their brain. And neither can we in our worst moments. It's the same for them and for us. That's why we often look like older examples of, they may be more extreme when they're melting down, but I'll tell you, some of my meltdowns can be pretty extreme as well. See, when we get dysregulated, there is a cascading of things that happen. Our breathing, both hormonally and with our neurotransmitters, our breathing rate increases so we can get oxygen into our bloodstream. Our heart rate increases. So we push our blood to our skeletal muscles so we can fight and flee. Our blood sugar levels increase so that we can have more energy. Our pupils dilate so we can see danger. Our intestinal muscles relax. Now, that doesn't seem like that would be all that helpful, right? However, what happens under stress is, because it's triggering our fight and flight response, we shut down the systems in our body that use up the most energy. One organ that we shut down is our brain. Our brain uses up 2% of our body mass, is 2% of our body mass, but uses 20% of our energy. And our intestinal muscles are the next system. Our digestive system is the next system that begins to shut down because it takes up the most energy. Have you ever had dry mouth when you've had to give a toast? That's your digestive system shutting down, or felt butterflies, or felt sick to your stomach. This is our digestive system shutting down. So all of these things are happening. We talk about in these moments being full brain or lower brain. We talk about being regulated or dysregulated. Ross Greene used to quip, this was probably 15 years ago when I heard him say this. He said, when we're melting down, we lose about 30 IQ points. And that might be an underestimate for me. I think I'm closer to 40 or 45, but we just act dumber, don't we? And so here we are. If you took a brain scan of me when I'm melting down, I think this is what it would look like, right? But here's the thing. When there's a dysregulated child, there's a dysregulated adult. It's really hard to stay regulated around other people who are dysregulated. And so if I'm on a plane, for instance, and I look up and and there's turbulence, and I look up and the flight attendant is calm and reading a magazine, I'm like, okay, we must be okay. But if the pilot comes out of the cockpit and says, "Oh my gosh, I've never had turbulence like this. What are we going to do?" His dysregulation would quickly make me dysregulated, right? The same thing is true for kids. When kids are dysregulated and yelling at us or becoming oppositional with us, shutting down, saying things that are frightening for us, that make us feel out of control, we are quick to become dysregulated ourselves. But the opposite is also true. When I'm dysregulated, you can bet that I'm going to say and do things that may quickly create a firestorm in my own family. But here's the thing. When our child is dysregulated and then we're dysregulated, we've both lost 30 IQ points. Together, we've lost 60 IQ points. Is that a good time to solve a problem? I don't think so. I'm not saying we don't try and solve the problem. I'm not saying that we don't try and have them listen and find another solution and learn how to be flexible and all of these things. But what I am saying is let's not do it when they can't access that part of their brain. And let's not do it when we can't access that part of our brain. Because bad things get worse when we try and do that. And I think we've all had experience when we've been dysregulated, in response to our child's dysregulation, and then said and done things that make things worse. So what does lower brain look like? Well, it looks like this, right? It's that anger. But this is also what lower brain can look like. It can look like just feeling overwhelmed. It's oppositional behavior. What oppositional behavior does, it says, I'm not doing it. I'm just going to stop everything, right? Sometimes it's checking out. It's like this daydreaming. It's this dissociation. And other times you've got kids who are just so desperate to do just the right thing, and they seem to have be doing all the right things, and they've got straight A's, and they're president of student council, and they are captain of the soccer team, and all of a sudden they're admitted to a partial hospital program, right? It shows up in different ways and it looks different for each of us. But here's something that I think is really important. What puts us into lower brain? The top three are really, I call it the holy trinity of dysregulation: feeling disconnected, devalued, and powerless. When you think about when you last melted down, my guess is that it was some combination of all three of those, maybe even all three. And then there's basic needs. Have you ever been hangry? I get hangry all the time. Or tired. When I'm tired, I'm much more irritable, much more impulsive. Um, I like to say that I was a much better I still am a much better parent at 9 a.m. Than I am at 9 p.m. The problem is my kids never saw me at 9 a.m., right? They don't have any idea what a great dad I could be, because the only dad they saw was the tired, irritable dad that they got at night. So these basic needs can really impact our sense of our own regulation. So if that's what dysregulation looks like, what does regulation look like? Well, this is kind of the sweet spot of regulation, right? It's dark, it's warm. We can hear our parents' voices softly through the womb. We get our food through the umbilical cord, not through cold pureed vegetables. We've got, we can pee and poop and not have no diapers or anything, right? And then when a child is born, what do? Our whole job as parents is to soothe, isn't it? All we do is soothe. And when they're distressed, then we try and figure out, how do we regulate them? And we think we've got a checklist in our head, don't we? First, we start with physical needs. Are they hungry? Do they need a nap? Do they need to be swaddled? Do they need to be changed? Right? And then if those things don't work, then we get them into a relationship is important. Their ability to connect to somebody that their limbic system says, "Oh, I'm safe with this person. Their smell is familiar," and we use relationship to co-regulate them. And then the last one is interesting. It's rhythm. Have you ever noticed how we use rhythm to regulate kids? And a guy named Bruce Perry, a guy who is an expert in childhood resilience and trauma, he says that the reason why rhythm is so important for kids, bouncy chairs, gliders, rocking chairs, music, all of these things that have rhythm, is because anything that regulates us falls within a parent's heartbeat, the cadence of a parent's heartbeat. It's the same thing for us as adults. I still get regulated on a hammock or a swing or listening to music. All of these pieces, the beats of the music, fall within the range of a parent's heartbeat. So here's the thing. We know when they're infants that when they're distressed, all we are going to do is soothe them. But all of a sudden, when they get to a certain age, we start to feel like, oh, their dysregulation is intentional. And so we begin to punish them for it, don't we? We call it the terrible twos, and we create timeout corners, and we do all of these things. Why do we stop regulating? Why do we stop soothing in those moments? And I think it's because kids develop language, and we believe they should understand what we're saying, and if they understand what we're saying, they should do it, or they learn how to say no. And then we feel like we've lost control. And so I think our job is still to soothe when our kids are distressed. It's much more helpful for me when I'm distressed for someone to soothe me than to punish me, right? And then can we teach them how to soothe themselves? And that's the holy grail, is helping them learn how to soothe themselves. The bad news is we often respond to punishment, to dysregulation with punishment. And what we know about punishment is it devalues, it disconnects, and it disempowers. So we only further dysregulate them. Have you ever given your kid a punishment and they melt down more? That's because we're further dysregulating them, or we overprotect them. I'm not saying that we should never have kids get dysregulated. What I'm saying is when they're regulated, everybody gets dysregulated all the time. It's not about making sure that kids never get dysregulated. When they are dysregulated, it's not about trying to take away the stress. It's about trying to help them manage that stress. But we typically do one of these two things, and neither is effective. So the good news is that we can teach regulation. So you heard a lot about social emotional learning. Well, this is the social emotional learning competency wheel. There are 5 parts of it. But regulation really takes up 2. Self-awareness and self-management is all about emotional regulation. And so when you hear about SEL in schools, and District 95 does as good a job as anybody at helping kids learn these skills, that this is where this is how they learn, is through self-awareness. And then when I'm aware of my dysregulation, then I'm going to learn tools and how to manage it. We also know that something as simple as breathing can have a huge impact. Learning how to breathe through our dysregulation is really important. There's nothing else that decreases the cortisol levels, those the stress hormones in our brains, as quickly. It decreases them immediately, reducing this feeling of stress. It's a simple skill to learn, but it's really hard to do. More good news is that relationships are regulating. This is what we talk about when we think about co-regulation. Just like dysregulation is contagious, so is regulation. When you're really upset and you've got somebody who is calm and will listen and be able to be grounded with you, all of a sudden you begin to feel more grounded yourself. It's just as contagious. What it's saying is my nervous system is telling your nervous system that everything's okay. You can quiet down. If the house was on fire, my nervous system would be going too, but no, everything's okay. You're upset about something, but my calm is helping your nervous system know everything's okay. I want to share just how powerful this is. And it works especially well without language. So Michael Jr. is a comedian, but he's also a dad. And take a look at what he does to be able to quiet the stress his newborn infant is experiencing, the stress of just being born.
Yo, comedian Michael Jr. here. As you know, I just flat out enjoy doing comedy. But one of the things I love way more than that is being a dad. Not too long ago, I'm going through some video footage and I run into this video of my youngest daughter being born. Now, of course, I was there, I actually took the video, but I had never really experienced it from this perspective before. Now look, we're in the hospital room. She's sticky and she's baby and all that stuff, and she's in the middle of crying. And then I speak up. I start talking to her, and watch how she responds when she hears my voice. It's okay, Portland. Look, I'm right here. It's okay. It's okay. I'm right here. I'm right here. You're doing just fine. It's okay. It's okay. I'm right here. Right here. Yeah. It's okay. It's okay, baby. It's okay. That was pretty awesome. So check it. A few minutes later, the nurse starts working on her, puts her pamper on her, and I'm not saying anything, and she actually starts to cry again. Then I speak up, she hears my voice, and stops crying, like again. But I want you to notice what else happens after I tell her that I love her. Mom hold you. Portland, it's okay. It's okay. It's good. It's good. It's good. I'm right here. I'm right here. I am right here. I love you. I love you. I love you. Yeah, I'm right here. I'm right here. It's okay. It's okay. That's just phenomenal.
Amazing, right? And you know it's not the words. You know that it is just his tone of voice that and the voice itself that Cortland heard through the womb for all of her her time in the womb. See, one of the things we try and do is we try and talk sense into people when they're dysregulated, and we can't talk sense into people because they can't access that part of their brain. So, but have you ever, when you're really upset and someone tries to tell you exactly what to do, it just sounds and feels like this, right? But being present is helpful. Can we just be present? Can we co-regulate? Can we wait until their brain's back online, our brains are back online, and then let's figure out if we can be helpful. But being present is always the first step. When little people, and I would say big people, adults, anybody, when we're overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not join their chaos. So I want to talk about Stuart Shanker's work. He's really a pioneer in the self-regulation world, and he wrote a book called Self-Reg. And I love the way he thinks about this. He says we need to move from misbehavior to stress behavior. We need to think about misbehavior as stress behavior and not misbehavior. When we think about it as misbehavior, then we want to punish it. When we think about it as stress behavior, we want to remove the stress and understand the stress. And he talks that there are 5 domains of stress. The first is biological. The stress of, we talked about this before, being hangry, being tired. For some kids, there are sensory issues, right? Some kids get sick, or when we're feeling sick, it's hard, for us to be our best self. Emotional stresses. These are the stresses that we experience when we're experiencing emotions for the first time, or especially in teenage years, the intensity of emotions for the first time. It can be the first time we get cut from a team, the first time we ask someone out on a date, the first time we go to a dance, the first time that someone breaks up with us, the first time we fail a test, the first time, whatever. All of these things can create tremendous amounts of emotions for us. And that's stressful. cognitive stress is the stress they experience all day in school. This idea that they've got to sit for 42 minutes for 8 periods and be focused on something and not be checking other things. And it's very, very stressful. It's exhausting. It's interesting. You take one of those 3-hour tests, the SAT or GRE or whatever it is, whenever you've taken a long test, it's exhausting. I get out and I feel I haven't even taken a step, and yet I am more exhausted than if I've gone for a long run. That's cognitive stress. We can all relate to social stress. It's just how poignantly we feel that. And because we're a tribal species, whenever our social worlds are threatened, it triggers a stress response in us. It's very strong. And then there's pro-social stress. There's the stress of should I do something and take care of myself, or should I help others? Right? That if I've got money for lunch, for me to have lunch, and I've got a buddy who's hungry, do I share with them? In which case I'm frustrated because I don't get to eat it all, or do I keep it to myself and then I feel guilty? And we're constantly faced with all 5 of these stresses, especially in school. This is where teachers are experiencing it, students are experiencing it. You see, if I'm hungry and I'm at home, I can get a snack. Kids can't get snack. Teachers can't just leave and say, listen, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a 15-minute break and go get something to eat. Right? We don't get a break from any of these things. We need to go to from second period class to third period class, whether we're cognitively tired or not. If I'm home, I can say I'm going to put away my email for a while and I'm going to walk the dog and give that brain of mine a break. But we can't do that when we're in school. But here's the thing, when we think about stress, have you ever lost your temper, shut down, or avoided something and not been stressed? And here's the thing, there's always a reason why we get upset, and we can say, well, it's because my kid was acting like such a jerk, but my kid acts like a jerk often. I mean, I wouldn't say that. My kid's upstairs. Sorry. But I respond to that differently depending on how stressed I am. There are times when my kids are upset with me and I handle it really well. And there are other times when they're upset with me and I then really struggle. And that's based on my stress, not the challenge that they're showing me. Why would it be any different for kids? When kids are struggling, when they're showing these challenging behaviors, there's always a stress behind it. And what stress does is it depletes our energy. And I love the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, who says positive and negative emotions are all about how much energy we have in our brain. She talks about it as brain budgeting. When we are having a great day, we've had a good night's sleep, things are going great in my family, I get a lot of good feedback about a talk, I have a nice chat with my brother on the phone, right? These are all deposits to my brain balance. What she says is there are also a lot of withdrawals. If I'm in conflict with my child, that's a withdrawal. That sucks energy out. If I've got a financial stress, if a parent is going to be in, if I have to help my parent get into memory care, all of these things, if I've got some job insecurity, whatever that may be, all of these things are withdrawals because they're stressful, and that stress takes energy. And what she says is, if we think about our brains as a checking account, we want to make sure we do better when we're in the when we've got more deposits, when we've got a high balance. But when we're overdrawn, we really don't show up well. So she talks about what are some of the biggest deposits: sleep, diet, and exercise, right? These are things we know are great deposits in our brain's bank account, as is a hug from a friend, as is all of these things are wonderful deposits. And so what we want to do is think through, as kids are managing stress after stress after stress, or we are, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're also putting good deposits in there as well. We talked about cognitive stress. That's one of the stresses. And I want to talk about a study. And And I love the way Shanker talks about this. He says, we often think of people as lazy. And so, the question is, are you lazy? And we're going to find out just how lazy you are by you're answering this question. All right. It's a logic question. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat cost $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? So take a minute and think about that. Now, you're either going to do one of three things. You're going to answer it right, you're going to answer it wrong, or you're not going to do it at all. So if you answer it wrong, it means you didn't check your work. Because if you checked your work, you'd have done it right. But my guess is that if you said 10 cents, and most people actually say 10 cents, 10 cents is wrong. The answer is 5 cents. See, the bat and the ball together cost $1.10. If the bat costs $1 more than the ball, if the ball costs 10 cents, that means the bat costs $1.10, which means together they cost $1.20, right? So what is the law of least effort? The law of least effort says we are constantly leaving a little bit in the tank in case of emergency. So we put in less effort than maybe we need to solve this problem. If I told you to get down and do as many push-ups as you could, let's say you're really fit and you can do 25 of them, right? And then you're exhausted, you collapse. But if I said I'll give you $1 million for each additional push-up, I'll bet you could crank out 2 or 3 more, right? Because you left a little bit in the tank. The same is true for our brains. One of the things that's interesting, they did this research in a laboratory. They gave people problems like the one I just shared. What they were able to do is within a split second, they could tell within a split second whether someone was going to either answer impulsively wrong or say, I'm not doing this problem anymore, by their pupils dilating. Now, remember, we talked about pupils dilating before. What are they a sign of? It's a sign that we are dysregulated. And so when we are dysregulated, we shut things down. So what he talks about in this is that the more aroused we get, and the more we are expected to perform, what happens is as we get more and more dysregulated, we reach a point, and at some point, we just shut down, right? That at some point in the night, it's 7:30 at night, 8 o'clock at night, and I just can't even do another email. And so I shut it down. At some point, we decide, we don't actually decide, our brain decides for us, we can't go on anymore. And that's to be able to preserve a little bit left in the tank. He talks about this as the intolerable peak or the limbic break. Remember that limbic system, that alarm system telling us, uh-oh, you're running out of brain energy and I'm not going to let you do that. So we're going to stop everything right now. We're going to get you out of this situation. See, our hypothalamus is a part of that limbic system. And what our hypothalamus does is it measures how much glucose is left in the brain. It's almost like the gas gauge on our car. You know how when you get down and you're about 20 miles or however long before you run out of gas, it goes off to help you stop and get gas. What it wants you to do is pull over right away so you can get gas, so you don't run out of gas. This is the same thing our hypothalamus is doing, is it's measuring how much energy we have in the tank, and then it says stop before you completely run out. And so here's the thing, the more depleted we are when we start a task, the quicker we reach the intolerable peak, right? So if I've had a really bad day at work and I get into someone with road rage comes at me on the drive home and I'm really hungry and I get home, can you see how I'm getting closer and closer to my intolerable peak? And then my son asks me something basic and simple that might be a little bit annoying, and I snap at him, right? That's boom, I hit my intolerable peak. But if I've had a great day at work, I just got a raise, I saw some friends on the way home, I had a nice meal, I come home and the house looks great, I walk in and my son has the same problem, I'm going to handle that in a really different way because I'm not even close to my intolerable peak. Some kids are more vulnerable. They spend more time getting closer to the intolerable peak when they've got attention problems, if they've experienced trauma. If they're slower processors, the world is more stressful. If they struggle with past failure, if they're slower to develop, kids who experience discrimination or poverty, if there's significant family stress or social stresses, if school's really hard for them, then all of a sudden they're carrying all these things. So can you see how these kids are much closer to hitting that intolerable peak than other kids who school comes easily to them, family life is home and stable. They're popular in school and they've got a lot of friends, right? It's going to take them much longer to hit their intolerable peak. And so what happens when we hit that peak? Well, it's the same stuff that happens, right? We shut down, we get angry, we become overwhelmed, we become oppositional, we check out, we daydream, right? We try and be more perfect. So what do we do to support them? Well, we got three basic options. We can punish them. We can ask them to push through it, right? Try and drive as far as you can on after the gas light has shown up. Or we can try and replenish. We can pull over and get some more gas. The problem with punishment is it further depletes our resources, because it triggers our fight or flight. When we punish kids, they feel disempowered, they feel disconnected and devalued. And so all of a sudden we're triggering that fight and flight, which is what's already for someone who already has very little in the tank. We can't ask them to power through. We can ask them to keep driving, even though the gas gauge is flashing that light. What ends up happening is it's really hard when we're depleted to be able to perform at our best. So our performance is lower. There also can be real physical costs. When we add during finals week, have you ever noticed that, we ask kids to stay up all night and working incredibly hard for a week, maybe 2 weeks? One of the things gets triggered, and when our stress response gets triggered, is our immune system. Finals week is over, they finally have some time to themselves, but their immune system is shot. So they get sick, and then they spend the entire break on the couch, right? Or they melt down. They're more likely to melt down, and that can show up as temper tantrums or avoidance. During finals week, for instance, it can show up when we ask kids to push through. The rate of hospital admissions for mental health issues skyrockets during finals week. Or we can help them restore. We can pull over and get some more gas. So what does Stuart Shanker say? He says, here are the things we want to do to help kids develop self-regulation. First is when they're melting down, when they're having a hard time in their worst moments, is it limbic braking or is it laziness? Is it misbehavior or stress behavior? Let's take a look at the stress instead of seeing it as misbehavior. And when we see it as stress, can we figure out what's causing that stress? And then can we reduce it? Can we remove the stress? Can we help them cope with that stress? And then ideally, we help them develop a self-awareness that they're getting depleted so that they can then restore before they reach that peak, so that they can reestablish homeostasis, so they can re-engage with their best brains and their best bodies. And so these are the 5 strategies. Help kids reframe it. They're not bad kids. They're just they're stressed. Let's recognize what the stress is, and then let's help them learn how to reduce it. Let's help them learn from that, and then learn also how to restore. So what does this mean for us as parents? What does all this mean? It means when kids are stressed, when kids are having their hardest moments, the first thing we need to do is we need to regulate ourselves first, because then we can help them co-regulate. We are no good when we've lost these tools. We can't help them if we can't help ourselves. And so it's important that we regulate ourselves, so we've got all of these tools to be able to support them. And I guess I want to say there's no shame in dysregulation. We all get dysregulated throughout the day, sometimes more, sometimes less, in terms of the intensity. But you're getting dysregulated after sitting here and trying to listen to me for 45 minutes now. That in and of itself can be dysregulating. The problems occur when we deny our dysregulation. Let me give you some examples. They did a study. They studied 1,400 parole hearings. They wanted to see who gets parole and who doesn't. What are the factors that influence hearing officers' decisions to give someone parole? And they actually looked at all sorts of factors, things like how violent the offense was, how long they spent incarcerated, did they show remorse, did their families show up, all sorts of things. What they found was there was one main thing that determined whether someone got parole or not. People with the earliest parole hearing, the 8:30 parole hearing, 40% of them got parole. The people who had 11:30 in the morning hearings, none of them got parole. What this means is it's the judge's dysregulation. It's the judge's need for, it's the judge's hunger. It's the judge's feeling like they've been sitting too long. And then they're not as able to listen as well. They're not as flexible in their thinking. And probably most importantly, they lose empathy. But at 8 in the morning, they've had breakfast. They've seen their colleagues. They sit down. Their brains are open. Their empathy is there. They're flexible. They're much more willing to consider giving someone parole. Another study, seminary students. This is in Princeton. They gave seminary students an assignment. They needed to give a sermon on the Good Samaritan. And my dad was a minister, so I've got no excuse if I get some details of this wrong. But as I understand it, as I learned it, the Good Samaritan story, there's a man lying bloody and naked at the side of a road. And for a long time. And the religious elders kept a wide berth walking on the other side of the road. And it was a Samaritan, a non-religious person, who picked that man up, took him to an inn, made sure that he could stay there and get clothed and heal as long as he needed. And they paid his time for his time at the inn. And it's really about how the problem of religious elders being blind to the pain and suffering of their parishioners. So they gave these guys this activity to give the sermon on the Good Samaritan, but they told them to go to the wrong chapel. So they went to the wrong chapel to begin with. And then someone there says, oh, no, this is not the right chapel. You're supposed to go to the other chapel across campus. And you're going to be late. And so these guys take off and they run across campus. Anybody else get a little nutty when they're late? That's another thing that dysregulates me. And so in order to get there to the other chapel, you have to run through a very thin alley, a narrow alley. And in that alley, the researchers put somebody who's bleeding and clothes ripped, groaning on the ground. So the Good Samaritans had to decide, do I stop and help this person, or do I step over them in order to go give the sermon on the Good Samaritan, right? 90% of them stepped over the person who is in desperate need of help in order to give their sermon. These are good people, but when we're dysregulated, we don't show up that way. Anesthesiologists make 3 times more mistakes in the afternoon they do in the morning. Anesthesiologists don't want to make any mistakes, and they don't make many mistakes. So just be aware of that. But they do make more in the afternoon. So if you get nothing else out of this talk, 2 things: get your parole hearing and your operations in the morning. One more: LSU football. They love their football in LSU. Judges love their football in LSU. They did a study after LSU loses in an upset. What happened to judges' decisions the next week? And when the team loses an upset, judges in Louisiana added 1,300 additional days of punishment to juvenile defendants as compared to weeks when the LSU team won. See, our feelings often catch us off guard. And we make our worst parenting decisions when we are dysregulated. Have you ever noticed that when we're dysregulated, that's when we tend to be impulsive? Hallmarks of our dysregulation is that there's a sense of urgency. We need to fix this now. and a sense of exaggeration. If I don't fix this now, then they're still going to be they're never going to be able to get if they don't do their chores now, then they're never going to be able to hold down a job when they're 25. So that's why I need to tell them right now, and we got to deal with this right now. No, that's our dysregulated brain talking. Can we step back, let our brains get back online, let their brains get back online? Because it doesn't have to be you. If you're dysregulated and your child needs support, let's get someone else in the family to help. And it doesn't have to be now. Let's take some time. Our children are watching how we manage our dysregulation as well. I love this. Children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they've never failed to imitate them. It's so important that we're aware of our dysregulation, that they can see us taking the time to regulate, making sure that we're taking care of our regulated selves so that they can then learn how to take care of theirs. Another strategy is to pause and ponder. I did some work with Highland Park with Highland Park teachers after the shooting, and the teachers, of course, were concerned of kids coming in having experienced that trauma, and the community just being embedded in a community that experienced so much trauma. And I worked with a woman named Mary Jo Barrett, and she shared something that helped me understand trauma, but it helped me understand regulation more broadly. She said, our lives have a rhythm to them, and this rhythm is really important. It's this rhythm of expanding and contracting that we need quiet times to be able to fully engage later, right? That there's that we have a good night's sleep so we can engage more fully in the day. We have a lunch break so that we can have a busy morning, and then we take a break, and then we have a busy afternoon, and then we have dinner, and then we get the kids to bed, and we deal with all of that, and then we sleep. That this rhythm is really important. We work a full work week, and then we have a weekend, that there's a rhythm to this. Sports teams play a first half, and then there's halftime, and then they play a second half. There's act one in a play, and then there's intermission, then there's act two. But this rhythm is really what keeps us regulated. But in our lives today, we've got ourselves and our kids so overscheduled that oftentimes we're taking away the breaks that are so essential. She talks about this as these moments to expand. That's when we fully engage, but we need to contract in order to expand. We would never say to somebody, you've got a big meeting tomorrow, spend all night working on that, perfecting that agenda. Don't sleep, because that agenda needs to be perfect. No, we'd say the agenda, do with what the agenda will work itself out, but you need a good night's sleep. That's what you need in order for it to be successful in this meeting. That we need to be able to contract in order to expand. But we need to be able to pause and ponder. Blair Braverman tells this story of, she was a dog musher in Alaska. And she tells this story, she says, when I strap my dogs in at the beginning of a race, they will run for about 40 miles hard, but then they'll collapse. She said, but my races are 500 miles. The Iditarod is 1,000 miles long. And so what we do is we race for 4 hours, and regardless of how we're feeling, we stop and we rest and we eat and we get warm and we take care of each other for 2 hours. And then we race for another 4 hours and rest for 2. She says, we could run forever that way. See, these breaks are essential, and these breaks are becoming rarer and rarer in our lives. Take a look. These are adult brains with meeting after meeting. The top row is when you don't have a break between meetings, with the red and the orange and the yellow being signals of dysregulation. Take a look. It takes just one meeting before you are completely dysregulated without a break. If we take a look at the bottom row, take a look. You can go 4 meetings and still stay regulated if you put in, and what they did was they put in about a 10-minute break in between those meetings. You can go forever that way. We just need to make sure we're building in these breaks. The same thing is true for kids and achievement. They gave kids the same test between 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10, 11, 12, and 1. And guess what? The scores went down as kids were more and more, their brains were more and more depleted. But there's a bump between 9 and 10. There's a bump between 11 and 12. And that bump may look like it's only a little bit, but it's equivalent to the kids in the 10 a.m. testing session getting 3 weeks of additional instruction. That's significant. How did we get that bump? Just by taking a 10-minute break where kids were able to move and be social and quiet that brain. Because what we know is that this rhythm is important. We also know that kids' lives have been expanding but not contracting. They're overscheduled. And our lives have been expanding but not contracting. We're trying to get them to all these places. And we've got, in most families now, both parents are working and dealing with those outside stresses, plus all of the things that it takes to navigate a family. Kids are getting less sleep. Is that a big deal? They're getting an hour less sleep in 1980 than they did in 2010. And that's before smartphones ended up in their bedrooms. And here's the thing, that an hour or less sleep is associated with increased symptoms of ADHD and obesity, behavior problems, academic problems, and social skills problems. What's upstream for a lot of our kids in mental health and their ability to perform academically? Sleep is upstream. We need to understand that challenging behaviors are signs of dysregulation. As Dean, a student says, and I love this, he said, when I see a student who's struggling, I think about two things. He says, I think, what would I need if I was in their place? What I realize is that if I was, when I'm having a hard time, being told to take a time out would not work out that well for me, right? What does help when I'm dysregulated is having someone who's calm and able to listen to me. He also says, I always try and figure out what I can put on the table instead of what I can take away. When I'm dysregulated in response to one of my kids, all I do is, it's like I've got a Rolodex of things. What can I take away? Because what I want to do is I want to take control. And I know that taking something away will try and make them comply with whatever I want. But I love this because he says, what can we put on the table? Before we figure this out, why don't you take the dog for a walk, right? Why don't you go listen to music? Why don't you shoot some hoops? And then come back and we'll figure this out together, because neither of us are in a good place. And what we're putting on the table are regulation strategies, aren't they? See, challenging behaviors are simply signs of dysregulation, but they provide us with our best opportunity to teach regulation. We've talked about this, but I want to emphasize this. Another strategy is just to co-regulate. My nervous system tells your nervous system that you're safe. The more we can do that, the better. Can we hold space with them instead of have to try and solve their problem? Because we can't solve their problem. We may think we can, we may want to give advice, but when we're dysregulated, nobody can hear that. And it just makes them more frustrated. Can we just say we see and hear and understand how much they're hurting? And then can we be curious? Ross Greene says, kids do well if they can. And doing well is always preferable to not doing well. The bottom line is when kids aren't doing well, it means there's something else going on. And so let's figure that out. And I guess what I would say is let's figure out what's stressing them out. And then when in doubt, listen, there are always themes when they're yelling and screaming at us. You don't love me. You love my, you love my sister more than me. That may not be true. And we can say, no, I love you just as much. But what it may be is, I'm not feeling that lovable right now. I'm not feeling like you're treating us fairly. Whatever it is, there's a theme there. There's I had a student who's a big kid, and he comes into school one day, and he's screaming, and he's saying, where's Bolton? I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. And people were standing in the way. He was pushing through him. If he was allowed to get to me, I think I might have been very hurt that day. And so we, he actually ended up having to be arrested. He was so out of control. And his mom went and picked him up. And as he was leaving the school with the police officers, he yelled, "Thanks, Bolton, for the chili." And that's when I knew what he was upset about. His mom picked him up at the police station and brought him back to school, and he and I met. See, his mom was dealing with cancer, and we had created a food train for him, and a parent had cooked a big bowl of chili. And before he left for school the day before, I asked him to come in, and I said, "Take a look at the chili I'm going to bring over to your family today." And he was so proud that he was able to provide for his mom and his family. He's had 3 siblings, that he was kind of the provider. He was so proud that his principal was going to come and bring dinner for the family. And he shows up and after he left, I got called in. There was a budget problem, and then I was late to pick up my kids. I completely forgot to drop the chili off. And so when his mom showed up with him in my office, and I said, "I'm so sorry." And his mom said, "We had plenty of food from all the other meals, Michael. What was it that was, why did this cause such a big problem for you?" But in that moment, for him, he had felt shamed and humiliated and so hurt. There was a story behind that. And I'm not saying the behavior is okay. And then we talked about when he gets upset, how can he handle behavior differently? But really, the work was to understand and to see what was it. There was a stress for him that was behind that. And when we were able to talk about the stress, we were able to figure that out. And then we were able to talk about the behavior. That's how we get there. Larry Steinberg, who's a developmental psychologist, says the capacity for self-regulation is probably the single most important contributor to achievement, mental health, and social success. Let's make sure that we're teaching emotional regulation, both by modeling it and by helping them co-regulate in these moments. I like this quote from E.L. Doctorow. It's about writing, but I make it about parenting. Parenting is like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. Helping them regulate once isn't going to get them to figure out regulation as a whole. I still struggle with emotional regulation. What we want to do is continue to see these moments as opportunities to teach them regulation. And slowly but surely, they're going to develop those skills. And eventually, you'll get to where you want to be. And then I'll end with this. Almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. And that's really the important thing, is instead of engaging when we're dysregulated, let's unplug. Let's get our brains back online. Let's help them get their brains back online. And then let's figure it out. All right. And a shameless plug for my book. If you want to dig deeper into this is a book about how do we support kids' development and resilience. And I think we do it through communities that are connected and emotionally regulated. So it comes out in March, so you can pre-order now if you're curious and want to dig into this a little bit deeper. And at the bottom is my email address. Thank you so much for having me, Lauren.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Bolton. So we will end the recording now, and we'll plan to share our session to anyone who registered thereafter. So thank you again.